original in the digital world, of course. You know, there are infinite copies. The digital is not analog. It removes the analogy from the original. And we can talk about whether cryptographic techniques are in principle able to solve this problem or not. But before we go there, let me just say that this is not something too uncommon. I mean, that our ways of looking at things, our, as Alex has called it, the mediated, the technologically mediated way of looking at things is deeply entrenched in our ways of understanding the world, even in physical theories. What you see here is a beautiful image, fairly recent image, and I talked to the astronomer taking this picture actually in a panel discussion a couple of years ago, who was convinced that this is an image of the galaxy, I don't know, billions and billions of kilometers from Earth. Although I pointed out it's really not an image, not at all. It is a construction. It's a construction of this various spectra where with highly sophisticated techniques, we then combine these different measurements into a single measurement. We even transform the frequencies such that we, as humans, can look at them and create these pictures. Now, the question, of course, is, in which way is this an authentic representation of the galaxy? And as far as constructions go, some physicists have even argued that what I cannot create, I do not understand. Some of you may know that this is what Richard Feynman left on his blackboard before he died. But of course, this has been taken up by other philosophers as well. Ludwig Wittgenstein talks about the fact that we make to ourselves pictures of facts. And you might, as the ultimate constructivism goes, you might even argue we only understand what we construct. So this mediation in terms of construction is nothing that we should be afraid about. It happens all the time. But what happens when we try to check authenticity? So here's a picture of that was until 2008 attributed to Franz Hals, a Flemish painter. It was sold for 10.8 million in New York by Sotheby's, and in 2016 was identified as fake. I'm not sure whether the price then fell. Sometimes it even goes up when you have a fake painting. But it's a very famous case. And of course, in order to find out whether that picture is original, whether that's authentic or a fake, there are several ways, several interactions we can perform with this image. First, what we would usually do, we would check the history. We would check its provenance. We would see who were the custodians of these piece of work. And in doing so, we would hope that this chain is a chain of trusted custodians. So it would, of course, make a difference if this was a chain of museums or it was just in the hand of some private people somewhere, maybe stored in a basement and then suddenly found, which would raise some doubts. We can do forensics. We can check for consistency of the content and claims. So if, for example, we knew a painting was exhibited for a long time somewhere in the southern plains in the US, then we would hope we would find some pollen or some seeds of plants of that area. So we can do certain physical checks, biological checks even. We could check the signatures. We could check the seals. Again, with some level of trust in either those who sealed it or who signed it or the way how this was done. And then, of course, in some cases where we have other objects, maybe 100 objects of something that were prepared, we can check whether these are instances or copies of that same object, or if this is really another Fabergé egg that is presented to us. So we would compare it with those copies. Now you can ask yourself how much of that you can do digitally and how much you would rely on this level of trust of other instances. And you'll see that, of course, some of this is represented in the digital world, but some aspects are not. For Byung-Chul Han, just to come back to this, the question of name, like in the signature that's represented in the signature, is already a very desperate one, because the digital world tends to be an anonymous world. Name and personality in principle tend to disappear, which also means that trust and promise tend to disappear. The homo digitalis for Hahn is anonymous. He's not a nobody, he has a profile, but of course it's this anonymity which for Hahn facilitates this respect. I think that's true, although that's not the whole story. We now have learned that even when people give their real names, they still are rather disrespectful online. But what's really behind it is that in the digital world, very often we separate the message from the messenger. Actually, this is what the whole theory of digital message sending is largely about. There is a message, and then there is the messenger, and then these are clearly separated most of the time, which of course destroys, in a sense, the name. It's interesting that already Kafka expressed his disconcern about this when sending letters. He said, how can we accept a letter, a message that comes from a ghost? So it's not just digital technology, it's even before that, even in a real world letter. Now, real world signatures are rather different from digital signatures. They do not just imply authorship. They may, in addition to having a name attached to an object, they imply authorship. They may imply being a witness, believing in the correctness of an object or a document. They may imply having read and understood what's written in a contract, and an agreement with it. Electronic signatures depend on means of verification, on trust in infrastructure, and watermarking is the worst. It even destroys the object. So all these aspects that we find in the real world are not so easy to take up digitally. And I'll speed up a little bit, as Alex has rightly pointed out. Now, even the very basic notion of trust, Hahn reminds us, is very difficult to bring into the digital world. The digital enables chains of trust. It enables mechanisms based on cryptography or on user reviews, if you like. But the notion of trust is actually rather the opposite in the real world. Can there be trust without surrender, without giving in, without actually having no proof, having no chain of trust? When Jesus dies on the cross, he gives into his Father's hands his spirit, completely trusting, without any proof, without any evidence, and certainly without any digital signature. So let's very quickly listen to what Patrick Stewart says on mediated authenticity, and my presentation is coming to an end here, and I have to ask Alex to quickly show us this video. It's just a 1 minute
yes,
excerpt.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to start it. So, can you hear it?
What I believe is that when I hear Piers sing Britain, I am hearing the authentic Benjamin Britten voice. In the same way that if only we could have, a recording of Richard Burbage playing Hamlet, we would hear Shakespeare's voice, not just through the notes, or not in Britten's case, or through the words with Shakespeare, but because the two men knew one another, and the creative process with Britten and with Shakespeare was to write for a very specific voice. And so there is an authenticity of quality about the Piers Britten recordings that can obviously never be equaled. I saw Midsummer Night's Dream at Covent Garden, and
we can stop here.
By then I'd already been in different productions.
Okay, thank you. Erich, do you still have to Want to add something to the?
Yeah, I have my two last slides.
Sorry, you are on it. So you can share.
Yep, coming up. Right. So what Stuart claims here is this recording would be authentic because the music was originally written for the voice of Peter Pears by Britten. It's authentic because the two men knew each other very well, which is a euphemism. They were partners. It is authentic because it goes beyond what is written in the score. And it would be a true presentation of Britten's original musical intention, the authentic voice of Britten, notably. So these are rather wild claims about authenticity, but I think this is how we actually talk about authenticity when we, for example, talk about musical interpretation. Not just musical interpretation. There's a recently published interesting article by C. Lynch about the hierarchy of digital objects, where he says, well, we need to distinguish when we talk about authenticity between data, between documents, between the sensory presentations represented in those data. So the question of authenticity does not so much concern integrity at bit level. Mostly our interest is essentially in higher levels. It's in what did a person say in a video? Is that authentic? Knowing already that this video is most likely a construction. It has been cut, it has been edited, it has been recomposed. So authenticity can only be charged with reference to a claim. It is a semantic exercise. And our question for the future then is, where do you want to go with this? So very often in the digital world, our frustration with the digital comes from expectations that digital technologies do not meet, that digital concepts do not meet, such as, for example, an online discourse on Facebook may not be well suited for a moderate fact-based discussion. It's just a wrong expectation we have from discourse online. So if then complete authenticity is a fantasy, what is the purpose of claiming authenticity for digital objects? What is the use of authenticity claims in these discussions, and how shall we use it in the future? So these are my conclusions, but I think I've mentioned all of them, so I can just, in the interest of time, stop here and thank you for your attention.